Welcome, everybody. We're really glad to see you. My name is Catherine Miller Wilson, and I am the Executive Director of Highest Pennsylvania. I am really pleased to be doing this in partnership with Interfaith Philadelphia, and they're here and they've joined us. We are very excited about this event. It is, as you know, Ramadan has already started, and Good Friday is this Friday, Easter Sunday is this Sunday, and Passover begins this Friday. And so it's quite the month to be thinking about the work that we do and some of the underpinnings for that work. So without further ado, I want to kind of tell you a little bit about how this event came about today. So Highest Pennsylvania is primarily a direct services organization. What that means is we provide direct immigration legal services and direct social services to low-income immigrants and refugees in Pennsylvania. While the bulk of our work is concentrated in southeastern Pennsylvania, we certainly do serve people from all over the state. And that actually, our expansion of services across the state has expanded a great deal during the pandemic because of our ability to use Zoom and so on, which has made it easier to serve clients in far-flung places, which is a sort of silver lining. So the direct services work that we do takes up most of our time, as you can imagine, but it also leads us to see patterns of discrimination, patterns of places where the system breaks down, patterns of injustice that we think that we can rectify through uplifting those patterns and our clients' voices. And so as a result, we also engage in advocacy work. And the way we normally do that is we have a staff board and volunteer committee that meets every other Thursday that reviews where we are in terms of the large variety of things that we want to advocate about. And we create strategies. One of those strategies is to host educational events just like this one. We have been doing events called Ask Me Anythings every other month, roughly. And the recordings of those events are on our website. And we do them to educate the public about a variety of issues, such as how does refugee resettlement work? How does asylum work? What is the experience of becoming a Philly neighbor, which is a volunteer position that we have. And if you look on our website, there's a whole large variety of those Ask Me Anythings, and we feel like they're a good 30-minute live stream opportunity to learn about an aspect of immigration law and policy and how it impacts us. So last month, when our advocacy team was meeting, we were discussing the fact that April was coming up and was a good time for another Ask Me Anything event. But we also remarked on the fact that April is a pretty big month for the major religions because of the holidays that I just described. And one of the things that these three major religions share is the commandment, if you will, to welcome the stranger. And so we felt like it would be a good opportunity to have an event where we could hear from faith-based individuals about how they implement and recommend that their congregations implement that particular commandment. And we could have a sort of free-flowing discussion about what that means and how to bring that into your daily lives. Even if you are not someone that is celebrates one of those three religions or lead a more secular life, I think it's still a really great guidepost to learn about from a faith-based perspective, how welcoming the stranger can be incorporated into your life. And after hearing that lively discussion, we hope that all of you will be inspired to actually work with us and engage in very specific advocacy. So after a brief break, we'll go into 3 breakout rooms, and you can choose your issue. A local issue is called Driving PA Forward, which is an issue about getting driver's licenses for Pennsylvanians. And so if you're interested in that, you can join that breakout room. You can hear a little bit more about what's going on and then engage in actually crafting a postcard or a letter or a script to call your state legislator. Another breakout room will be about pathways to citizenship. And similarly, we'll talk about some pending legislation. We'll talk about why it's important. And then we'll engage in some letter writing. And finally, there's a breakout room about humanitarian parole, which is a specific pathway that's been around for a while, but that has come up as a major advocacy issue because of what's happened in Afghanistan. And so you can hear a little bit more about that, and then also engage in letter writing. So that's the background for today's event. And why we're here this month. So I want to introduce you to our speakers. We're very excited to have with us Imam Bilal, who recently began serving as Imam, a Muslim religious leader for the Muslim Society of Delaware Valley. He serves at both the Muslim Youth Center of Philadelphia and the Islamic Cultural Center of Willow Grove. We also have joining us Reverend Josh Blakesley, who is the director of the Welcome Project PA and the pastor of Love in Action United Church of Christ. And finally, we have Senior Rabbi Jill Maderer. She's the Senior Rabbi of Congregation Rodef Shalom, a Philadelphia congregation, and she serves on the board of our co-sponsors, Interfaith Philadelphia. So I want to get us started off with our kind of opening question to each of you. How do you put the value of welcoming the stranger into action? And whoever is moved to start.
Although Oh, go ahead, please, Rabbi, after you, please. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. Go ahead, please, after you, Rabbi.
Oh, you're muted, Rabbi Maderer, you're muted.
Okay, now I see us all. That makes it easier, thanks. It's really great to join with all of you and to see faces and to join in conversation with my fellow members of the clergy. So it's great to see you. For the Jewish community, this question, I think, can't be separated from the time of year. And so although my answer might be the same any time of year, being immersed in Jewish time and just a couple of days before Pesach, Passover, we're thinking about the texts, the lessons of the Passover story in the Jewish community. And so a couple of textual foundations, I would say, that are at the heart of our Pesach story, our Passover story. And for those of you celebrating, thanks for taking time out of all of your Passover preparation, which is pretty extensive for a lot of us. So I think that we would start with the notion that's repeated over and over in the Torah, which is the commandment that in Hebrew commandment is mitzvah, to welcome the stranger. And that mitzvah is actually repeated more times than any other, 36 times it's been counted in the Torah, in our sacred literature. And many times the mitzvah or other mitzvot, other commandments, are actually followed with the statement, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And so it's not apart from our own understanding of our own story. So when in Jewish tradition, the foundational story of enslavement is a part of the narrative of who we are. We're not a people who comes from kings or queens. We're a people who comes from enslaved people. And although the history scholars will debate, the story is there. The story is part of our memory and our understanding of ourselves. And so I think many of us find great meaning in the sense that that story of being the outsider is there to help us shape empathy, and that it is not fully useful unless we understand that in an application for today. What does it mean to be the outsider today? What does it mean to have empathy today? To understand, what does it mean to be able to say, I've stood in those shoes in some way? And in the Haggadah, which is the text that we recite and read from and learn from during the Seder for Passover, during the ritual meal and service for Passover, is a quotation from our tradition that says, B'chol dor vador, in every generation, look upon yourself as if you were the one freed from slavery. So I'm not supposed to have pity on somebody else. I'm supposed to feel like, okay, I've been there. What does that mean? What does that teach me about how I need to enter the world today? Understanding I've been there. It was me. And that I think sense of empathy is not easy. And so I hope it's a high demand, a high charge from tradition, that every time for a week when we are avoiding the chametz, avoiding the bread products during Pesach, and we're eating the matzah, and it's not the tastiest thing in the world, but you know, we're making all of our matzah crumbs, that there's a mindfulness there, that every time we bite into the matzah, there's a mindfulness. How is this reminding me of empathy? How is this reminding me of what it means to bring the voice of the outsider? My sense is that all of our traditions actually have these opportunities for ritual and mindfulness to try to get us to the wisdom and the principles that we want to try to bring into our world today. Catherine, your turn to unmute.
Yes, sorry. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Imam, do you want to share where your faith is coming from with respect to welcoming the stranger?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be amongst all of you, both the panelists here, the esteemed colleagues, and everyone who is participating, especially Hayes for putting this presentation together. I want to thank you. And I do want to share one or two things, hopefully, that can shed light from our tradition in regards to welcoming the stranger. I don't know if it's coincidental or it's just so relevant, but there is a statement from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with literally the same term and wording, that he says, "Blessed are the strangers." And he says, Islam began as a stranger. So mind you, in pre-Islamic Meccan period, the tradition and the tribal understanding and practices of Mecca to introduce monotheism and the teachings of Islam was a strange thing. And he said, Islam began as a stranger, and there will be time where it will begin to or return to becoming the stranger once again. And he said, blessed are the strangers. But more on the point itself of welcoming people to your family, your community, into society, who literally are strangers, kind of like the way Rabbi was mentioning. We are in the month of Ramadan, and in the month of Ramadan, one of the lessons that we're supposed to understand and learn is to be able to empathize and relate with people who are not necessarily fasting for worship, but fasting because they have no other choice, because they don't have food to eat. So this empathy, this connection with humanity, to feel their pain, to understand their situation, to count your blessings. And similarly with the crisis of, the world today, anywhere we look, especially now with Ukraine and any other part of the world where there's a huge refugee crisis, perhaps in numbers that we've never seen before. And to be able to understand the plight of those people and their situation, their circumstances, and to understand our responsibility as people in our tradition and just as human beings in general. There's a great poem by Sadi, who is one of the great poets of our tradition, where he says, Beni Adam Aza Yekpara, like every child of Adam is like one limb of a body, of the same body. And if you don't feel the pain of the other limb of the body, then you're false in your claim to be a part of this human family. So you don't deserve to be human, he says, basically. But one last thing I'll mention, in the words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, he swears by God and says he is not a true believer. And they say, who, O Messenger of God? And he says, the one who goes to bed on a full stomach while the people in his community, his neighbor, the strangers in his community, if you will, are starving, are in need of food and shelter, are destitute, or misfortunate. So there's a direct connection with our faith and our tradition. In the sense that you could be observing Ramadan, you could be fasting, praying, and doing all kinds of quote unquote righteous and religious practices. But if that doesn't move you to become in some word, an activist or someone who is actively engaging in the community's needs, then you're not really a believer. Your faith, that religious practice and the spirituality hasn't made the impact that's necessary, that's expected from you the way it should have. So, and God knows best. So I just like to share those 3 points with you. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And, it strikes me listening to you, and I hope the Reverend will speak about this as well. You both highlighted, you said a lot of things, but the two things that I heard in common from the Rabbi and the Imam is that it's about empathy. And empathy isn't just, that you're able through your imagination to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, but that you're able through your experience. And that's a really, really important thing to recognize, that, we all are, have been in the same boat, in the same place. We have been strangers. And so that you can't look away from that. So let me turn it over to you, Reverend, to talk about.
Yeah, thanks. Well, that was a mic drop moment for both of you. That's awesome stuff. I want to just thank Hayes for doing this, because for me personally, this type of interfaith interaction and relationship building is what makes my faith real. Reminds me of what matters most. We can get caught up in a lot of other things, and particularly for us who are clergy and religious professionals, like this is just really special, especially during this time. As both of you mentioned, this is such an auspicious time of year for all of our traditions. Tomorrow, for example, I'll be joining with my faith community for a time that's called Maundy Thursday, Monday Meeting Commandment. And it relates to this, especially because the commandment that we observe tomorrow is the commandment of Jesus of Nazareth to love self, to love God, and to love neighbor. And I love what both of you said about both of your traditions being focused on not just welcoming the stranger and looking at the stranger as other, but saying we are strangers too. And in the story of Jesus of Nazareth, that's true from the very start. Jesus as a child is forced out of their homeland and family, and they're strangers and foreigners, and are escaping violence and escaping oppression. And then later on in Jesus' adult life, he speaks about being a stranger in his own land, in his own home. And the crux of what Jesus taught about welcoming the stranger, I think for me and I think for many other Christians, is honed in on one particular passage that's in the Christian Gospels, particularly the Gospel of Matthew, in which Jesus tells this metaphorical story about a king hosting a great banquet and who's invited and who's not invited. But the crux of the message of the story is in this phrase when Jesus says, "Come, welcome to the kingdom that you are invited to inherit, because I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was a stranger and you welcomed me." And that, of course, is congruent with what we as Christians call what the commandment on which everything hangs, which again is back to that love of self, love of God, love of neighbor. But it's not just welcoming the stranger. It's not just, again, as you both said really well, I can't say it any better. It's not just welcoming and saying, oh, there's a person in need and I'm going to go help them. It's saying, no, you are me. I am you. And it's not my tradition, but it's, my friends who practice the Sikh faith. Guru Nanak says, when you see a stranger, just remember that the stranger is just a part of yourself that you do not yet know. And I think that's really what sums up my faith practice and how I think about as a Christian and why I'm compelled as a human and as a person of faith to see a stranger as part of myself and to say, well, if I love God, this compassionate, extravagant, welcoming God, and I love myself, in turn, my love of neighbor is part of my love of self. So I think it's reciprocal in all ways, shapes, and forms. And I just really appreciate a lot of the things that you were both drawing out for me as we were having this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And, Reverend, it strikes me so much from the way you juxtaposed, you gave me water when I was thirsty, you gave me food when I was hungry, you welcomed me. So, we think of food, shelter, clothing as the essentials, right? But when you juxtapose those things, one of the essentials becomes being part of a community, right? It's not enough to get, it's really right, not enough to get nourishment, physical nourishment. There's nourishment of the soul is so critical, is as critical as physical nourishment and shelter, actual physical shelter, but the shelter of of community, of becoming part of a community and recognizing, I think in that moment when you're outside of the community and you're trying to get in, the vulnerability is so acute that all of our religions talk about the pain of that and the necessity, remembering that pain and the necessity to alleviate it through welcoming. Right. So it's really, it's a lot to ponder, but it's great. It's really great. So that's it. I want to kind of get from our lofty discussion a little bit down to the nuts and bolts. So what are ways that you work with your communities and your congregations to inspire them to engage in welcoming the stranger? And how do you talk about that? And what are the things that you do with your groups and your congregations?
Do you want to mix it up? Do you want to start this one?
Yeah, mix it up.
We could shuffle.
Who wants to talk? You wanna talk first, Reverend?
Sure. When it's that awkward silence, I just jump in. It's great. So my congregation that I serve is called Love in Action United Church of Christ, and actually, it's a funny story behind the name. Is that we had a contest a few years ago. We changed our name, and we had a geographical name before that, and we decided as a faith community that we wanted to reflect what we do in the world. And we literally had a contest, and it was public. We even asked people, what would you name a faith community? And this is the one that won the prize, Love in Action. I think it reflects really, what we've been sharing is, the practice of welcoming. And so for us, it's taken shape in this way. We're located in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and it's a place where I'll be honest, there are many folks who don't feel welcomed and historically have not been welcomed where we are located. And so we recognize that, and we also recognize that there were waves of immigrant communities, many of them coming from Central America and Mexico, and other parts of the world, and they were definitely needing to be welcomed, and also finding a place in the context where we are. So for us, it meant partnering with immigration law attorneys here in the city who would offer pro bono advice and consultations, and then we have bilingual therapy as well that we offer on a sliding scale. And those, I mean, very simple things that make a big difference for people. Likewise, we have some amazing organizations that we work with, like Amigos Community Center and New Sanctuary Movement, that have helped us to identify how our small little faith community can make a difference in people's lives. So it's partnering and collaborating, and we have like a food distribution that is a nutritional program to help families, especially during the pandemic, have access to appropriate foods and vegetables that they will actually eat and are good for them, and help them, you know, their students, help them achieve well in school and to live, you know, whole lives. And I think what we're mostly focused on in our community is to get people who are stuck in a cycle to be able to move forward and not continually cycle back to poverty and to the lack of welcome or marginalization. So it's relationship building. I mean, we've been saying it, right? That it's not about saying, oh, there's somebody standing over there. It's relationship building. It's becoming friends. It's saying, hey, how can we help you feel more welcomed? And then in doing so, we actually feel more welcomed ourselves. So I'm very grateful to be part of a tiny church that's doing big things because they have big hearts. But I would just say that it's about partnering and collaboration. That's how these things happen.
Great. That's really neat. So, so Imam, do you want to share how your community is implementing the message?
Sure, absolutely. Although I'm still the new guy in town, there are certain things that I'm aware of that our community has done in the past and is actively doing now. And although I'm new in town, my brother-in-law, who's also an imam, who has a community that's not too far from our Philadelphia center, also has a number of things that they're doing. So if I can speak on behalf of all of them, as a community here in this part of the country, with the most recent Afghan refugees that came in, and the relief organizations that all of our mosques kind of work with, like ICNA Relief, who has done and continues to do an excellent job finding homes and providing food and supplies and even job placement and other things of that nature for the number of newly welcome Afghan families, especially in the Norristown area. It was kind of further away from us, but you know, there's a lot of relocation areas that kind of are in that area. And our mosque here, Willow Grove, and the Muslim Youth Center of Philadelphia, we continue to have clothes drive, food pantry events. I'm aware that we've had like Know Your Rights programs in the mosque before. Again, there's a number of organizations like Muslim Justice League and things, you know, other organizations similar to the MFLA, I believe, and CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. So these organizations that come to our mosques and our facilities, you know, educating us as the community, the residents here, and especially the new, well, if we will use the same term, strangers or our brothers and sisters coming to be part of our community. My brother-in-law's mosque, actually, they house a number of students that are from Burma and, you know, also refugees. Most of them can't afford tuition or, you know, education or other things of that nature. And, you know, they provide free education and housing and clothes and all kinds of other things, especially, you know, not just, you know, academically, but also religious education that perhaps they would not be able to afford as well. So perhaps they'll become the imams of tomorrow, and, you know, quickly be acclimated to the community and to the society, both learning English and Arabic and and being exposed to the culture and things of that nature. I also was very excited to hear about Highest Pennsylvania, an organization that I was not personally familiar with. And in our first meeting, if you recall, or second meeting maybe, I was just trying to sign up everything that we can do to work with you to continue to benefit our community and figure out the other ways of actually putting to action our faith and our responsibilities. So I thank you for that. And I look forward to our work together.
Me as well. It's wonderful. So, Rabbi, tell us about Word of Shalom and the congregation that you lead in terms of welcoming the stranger.
Great, thank you. I think, one of the core ways that we try to walk this walk is really to follow the model of Highest and learn from the work you're doing and listen to what it is you need from us. And so, we see you as the experts and the leaders, and are grateful for the leadership you all take, and are glad to take part when it's appropriate. And so I think there's an advocacy day coming up in Harrisburg, so maybe you'll share about that. We hope to be with you there. And so I think the advocacy is really, really critical. I also think that there's, in a lot of justice work, there's an interplay between the advocacy and social change, and then the direct service on the ground, and both being important and inspiring each other. And part of our job is to determine, what is our mitzvah, meaning what is it that we as an organization can do well, and what is our contribution to the larger effort. Part of our mitzvah is actually raising up souls who are going to share in the empathy and share in the values and the principles. And so a part of what we need to cultivate for our own community is both service and also service opportunities, so that our congregants can learn and be involved and grow with us. And so one of the ways we do that is we have a weekly, what actually transformed during COVID into an outdoor food pantry for safety. And I think actually we're learning that the outdoor nature of it is actually helpful, because it's possible that folks feel that it's a little more accessible to be on a sidewalk than to go into a building they don't know. And so we've actually been able to serve a lot of neighbors. We have a weekly food pantry, basically, where we're offering fresh food, healthy food, diapers, menstrual products, to mostly neighbors who are not English speakers, is what we're seeing. And so we're seeing that a lot of folks who we assume to be undocumented are probably falling through other cracks. Many of these folks are housed in our neighborhood and just do not have enough to make ends meet, but there's a whole variety of people who are in need of really these basic things. So every week we're doing that, and then that puts us into some relationship. We have some translators. We have we offered COVID vaccines to that same community, so we have an opportunity then to be a little bit in more connection with our neighbors. And I think we at Word of Shalom are students of this, of discovering constantly how can we grow and evolve and understand our role in this world. It wasn't too long ago that, we're an historic congregation. We've been there for a long time. We've been at our location on North Broad Street, just above Spring Garden, since the 1860s. And we've been a congregation since 1795. And our earliest generations really saw themselves as needing to protect themselves from anti-Semitism out there. And until just a decade ago, we had a chain link fence around our property. And so within the last decade, that chain link fence came down, and we like to see that as not only a physical breaking down of a fence, but also as a mandate. How can we continually understand ourselves as a part of the community? And I don't think we're there yet. I think we're on a journey, and we're seeking out the right work to bring our own mitzvot into this world.
I think that's really great. And it strikes me as so vivid, both the chain link fence that you mentioned, but even more so the having the sidewalk food pantry, the recognition that as much as we all want, and what we're all talking about, of course, is saying that we're welcoming to our inside spaces, we recognize that some amount of going to where people are, rather than inviting them in, has to take place for that comfort level. And so I think that's really neat. So there's a question in the chat. What are ways you encourage members of your congregations to participate in the welcoming activities available in your communities? And Carrie, if you want to unmute yourself, because I don't want to make assumptions, but I assume what you mean is, we've heard from our faith leaders talk about the kinds of things that that they have available. And I think what you're saying is, how do you inspire people to engage?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So Imam, you want to start us off?
I guess I'll go first this time. I usually I'm always the young guy in the class or the room or the office or wherever. So I'm used to going last. That's just how things are. But I appreciate you letting me go first now. When it comes to inspiration, I was just mentioning the other night, like it's Ramadan. It's been 10 days since we began our fast. And I brought this analogy, and again, this is something I personally, I don't know if my colleagues here share that same sentiment, but in any capacity, whether it's a religious holiday or observance or political engagement or civic engagement or anything of that nature, there's always somewhat of a struggle to inspire, to ignite the motivation and the necessary action from our community. I was giving this analogy. I don't know if this will help, because that's my platform. I give sermons, I teach classes, I speak to my people, and hopefully the effect of the words can penetrate the hearts and bring people to action. But one of the things that I mentioned last night was, my daughter, and I say this, that you pray for her. She's just has this little fever and cough, and the doctor prescribed her 10 days of antibiotics. I said, it's been 10 days of Ramadan, and the doctor said to my daughter that if she doesn't feel better in 10 days, you got to bring her back. So I said, well, we've been taking somewhat of a spiritual antibiotic for the past 10 days, and there needs to be some kind of motivation, some kind of change, an effect on us, on our hearts and our bodies, and the way we think and our lifestyle, that brings the positive change that's necessary, motivating us to be more grateful, more patient, more understanding, more, all of those beautiful values that we're supposed to be learning in Ramadan. And of course, sometimes a sermon, sometimes lecture, prayer, various ways that in my limited capacity, or sometimes more advantageous in some comparison to other people, perhaps, whatever I can do to either lead by example or voice those concerns, and try to ignite that flame within the hearts. So it is a challenge to really get people on board, finding volunteers and getting people, as they say, talk is cheap. And, we love to talk about these things, and we mention them all the time. But at the end of the day, or at the end of the night, now the prayers are very long, and we begin with a full crowd, at 9:15 when the prayer starts, the whole mosque is full. But by the time it's 12 a.m., and most of the community is gone, and there's only one line or 10 people or 15 people left, it's hard to be those people, to be, and really stand guard in all of the meaning of the words, that in the sense that stand guard and do what's necessary, stand in prayer, do the work of the community. But I think I take that comment and that question as a reminder to myself that we need to keep, struggling and striving for that. And I don't necessarily have the exact answer or the solution to the dilemma.
Oh, I think the struggle is part of the inspiration, right? Struggling out loud, struggling in front of the congregation, acknowledging the challenges of doing the work, while also trying to take care of yourself and those that depend on you. So I think that's a really inspiring message. So I appreciate that. So Rabbi, any other, how do you inspire your congregants to engage?
I hope I inspire. You have to ask them if it's working, but I agree, Mom. We have such a privilege of the microphone. We have such a privilege of the access to communication, to the word, whether it's a sermon or an article, and even the opportunity to have this conversation today. I think that our positions afford us this opportunity to have this platform to be able to speak to our values, and I think that's a privilege, and that is my mitzvah. My responsibility is to bring words forth and to find the inspiration there. I think my congregation inspires me as much as I inspire them, no doubt. But not everybody engages in religion, and that's everyone's choice, and all respect to them. But I see power in religion. I see power in what it means to be, from my perspective, a part of a rooted history, a rooted tradition, and a spiritual sense that I'm a part of something greater than myself. And for me, the religion is another path, another tool in finding truth and justice. And so, the symbolism matters. Symbolism in a tradition can touch us deeply. And so for us, those words, those symbols, I think are just a blessing. It's another way for us to be able to access other human beings and other souls. I'm remembering I was with some Muslim friends when they were breaking fast at the end of a long day. And one of them taught me, Imam, you'll tell me if this is your tradition also, that one of the foods that they typically start with is a date. So they had dried dates out. And so this week I was at the grocery and I saw some medjool dates, and sorry to talk about food in the middle of your fast, but so I bought the dates, and it just sort of reminded me of that feeling and that work of deeper understanding, and that symbolism, even of just like this little food, it's powerful stuff. And I think our religions have, and our cultures have really powerful symbols that are a part of the inspiration as well.
So I think that's right. And it makes a lot of sense that so we've heard about acknowledging the struggle and struggling in front of the congregation. And then from you, Rabbi, the also connecting those dots for the congregation can kind of light a fire, right? Where you see the symbolism, you show how the activities are this, what we talked about in responding to the previous question, this nourishment of the soul, right? And that, yeah, I think that's really neat. So Reverend, how do you inspire?
As I heard both of you speaking, it was really fascinating because I found myself also being challenged to think about my role, as both of you addressed it, and how we're inspired by the folks that we work with, and but we also have this platform and this privilege to speak, to write, to share. And so I thought about two things to answer this question, which is a great question. And the first thing that came to mind was, we first have to create an awareness. And for me, what that means in terms of welcoming the stranger to inspire folks to do the same is that we should not make assumptions. So in all of our traditions, we should stop making assumptions. We should stop assuming things about our neighbors outside of our walls, even assuming things about our own folk. Understanding that everybody's having a different experience in this world. And when we are practicing our faith, when we are praying, when we are observing, our different traditions, to not make assumptions and to create an awareness both for ourselves as leaders on a personal level, but also for our communities, so that we're aware of each other and aware of what people are experiencing. And attending an iftar, which I will do with my friends in Willow Grove soon. And I've been to Rodef so many times with my faith community, and it just creates an awareness. And the last thing I'll say is, after you create an awareness, then it's about setting the intention. And setting the intention about how can my faith community, how can I as a person be welcoming to other people? And it can look so different, right? So I love what Rabbi Mader was saying about Rodef's history and about the fence coming down. I know that story, and I live across the street from Rodef, and it's a powerful image, that image of taking down that fence. And that's what I mean by setting intention. So wherever you are in your tradition, you start small and you say, what is the intention today that I'm setting for myself? The actions that I'm going to take today that relate to welcoming the stranger. And it starts small, it starts in that way. And then with our faith communities, obviously it's a more macro level. It doesn't mean taking down a fence. Doesn't mean welcoming the community to an iftar, where all people are welcome to experience that, maybe for the first time. What does it mean for us to set that intention? So first, create the awareness of where you are, and don't make assumptions, and then set the intention. You both inspired me to think about those two things. So thank you.
That's wonderful. I want to note in the chat, Chris Watson had shared, having a deep understanding of the culture of the other would be helpful. Deep listening and fellowship with others is key. And I think, that is a wonderful comment, and again uplifts the very specific examples of the food pantry on the sidewalk because of the shyness about the building and those kinds of things, and going, as Reverend, as you said, going to an iftar. I also am going to attend my first one, which I'm very excited about. I will probably see you there. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So we have a little bit of time, which is of course not enough for the next question that I want to ask, but I still want to ask it. So we'll just give ourselves a taste. So that next question is to talk about what your religion says about going against civil law when the laws are viewed as in conflict with your religious values. And of course, specifically with welcoming the stranger, we saw in the 4 years under the Trump administration, mass deportations, and we also saw institutions of faith giving sanctuary to families. And it was certainly beautiful to see those institutions take those families in. I can imagine that the decision to do that was incredibly challenging, and that many of you may have thought about doing that, may have not had the facilities, but also, how do you wrestle with those challenges where the laws really are contrary to what the message that you're providing your congregation is?
I think I have to go first again.
Okay.
Yeah, switching it up. I'll be fast. This is a really, really important question. I just want to first say, so everyone is aware, I mean, you are already, I'm sure, but just to reiterate it, by no means am I going to speak on behalf of all Christians, and thank goodness, because there are many harmful things that Christians are doing and Christian communities have done and are doing against folks. And so I can only speak from my tradition and practice, but also from the communities of faith that I work with who identify as Christian communities. So I'll just say this really simply. There are so many flaws in immigration systems in the United States. There are so many horrific policies that have been passed and instituted in this country and around the world, for that matter. And the issue for me is both personal and collective. As a human being and as a person of faith, as a Christian, I do feel a responsibility when I see an injustice that another human being is suffering needlessly just because of a policy or a systemic oppression. I do feel a responsibility to do what I can, whether that's like Rabbi Mader was saying, something that's policy oriented or behind the scenes or whatever, or it's on the ground direct kind of service stuff. But then collectively, I also feel a responsibility to challenge folk, challenge other Christians to own up to it and to understand how we can be a part of these oppressive systems if we ignore them. I mean, even, Jesus of Nazareth spoke to this so many times, that people are in these situations not because somebody else is doing it, but because we're ignoring it, because we're choosing not to help. And if we collectively, as people got together and said, you know what, we want people to have mobility so they can get food and healthcare and go to school. We want people to have driver's licenses. So how come I can have a driver's license and somebody else who doesn't have the same immigration status cannot? That makes no sense, right? But we need to pay attention. We need to, again, set that intention, both personally and collectively. So to answer the question, I think our faith, at least in my practice of my faith, it impels me to identify policies and laws that are harmful to other human beings, without question.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's so, I mean, it's not as if immigration is the only place, right, where there's a conflict between religious teaching and American law. But American immigration policy is certainly a big gaping problem in the way that it treats people. And as you all know, there's so many levels and layers of problems, not the least of which is that our policies, depending on who you are and where you come and how you come and all this stuff, you end up getting effectively made vulnerable by American policy, which seems like the exact opposite of what any good government should be doing. It's one thing to say, okay, we don't have an obligation to extend ourselves in this or that way. It's a totally other thing to say, oh no, we are going to put you in a position where you are vulnerable and dependent and not able to, through your own devices, to get out of the vulnerability that you're in. And that obviously, I think is morally wrong. It's certainly wrong from the religious teachings that we've all talked about. And it's harmful to our community. I mean, it's not what government is about. Again, it's the opposite of what government should be doing. But so yeah, I very much appreciate those comments. So Rabbi and Imam, anything you want to add about that particular struggle, about the direct conflict between the laws of the land which you inhabit and the laws of your teachings?
I think I really appreciate what you just said, Josh, and just the beauty and purity of it is really moving. This is, for us in Jewish tradition, this is a tension. We do have explicit tradition around following civil law of the land. Probably it comes out of a time when we just wanted to convince everyone we weren't here to cause trouble and please accept us. And now I think it is a tension there, because we need to look at what privileges we do have and what good we can do, especially when those civil laws could be in conflict with our justice values. I don't think we've settled on a place in that tension, but the tension is there. I can say personally for my congregation, we look to show support. Like I said, we're supporting weekly. We're supporting many people who are undocumented. We've supported the sanctuary movement, but we haven't opened our doors and created the apartment in our synagogue to take that bolder step. So that's where we are in the tension. Can't say where we'll be in the future. I think for me, I think that it's not only tradition, but also the culture of my congregation is that there's a lot of good that we find we can do if our mitzvah is to do things within the law and to have influence within the law. And that's also a way for advocacy. And so that's definitely been our path. I will say, I feel more likely to engage in civil disobedience if it is I who is putting something at stake rather than for the congregation, then that is a much larger question. So, in my early days before same-sex marriage was approved, technically when I did same-sex marriages, that was civil disobedience. That was more on me. So that's part of the weighing that I do also, but it's a journey. It's a journey. I'm listening.
That's great. Thank you. So Imam, how is your struggle and your community struggle, both, I would say, with those issues?
Well, before I get to that, I have to mention and thank Reverend Josh again for plugging the iftar. And I'm very excited that I hope everybody can show up, Rabbi, yourself, and everyone else. You're more than welcome. It's on April 26th. It's a Tuesday at 7 p.m. in our Willow Grove Center. I'm not technically savvy as well as good as some of my colleagues are, perhaps. So I couldn't find the flyer, but I'll share it with you in another email and perhaps we can share it with everyone. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that, and I would love to be able to host and break bread with all of you. Two other things, and I'm going to try to mention them in order because there is a personal component to this matter that affects me directly because my wife is an immigrant. My parents are also immigrants, and the whole process of how they became citizens, and my wife still is not a citizen yet. And the whole process I've seen firsthand on how our system works or doesn't work or needs to be fixed, however you would like to identify it. But I do want to make sure that I clarify from our tradition what our stance is on these matters where, we mentioned, okay, there is these fundamental rights and these universal freedoms that every human being is entitled to, similar to what Reverend Josh was mentioning, like, driving, like it's a necessity, it's something that regardless of your legal status that everybody needs to have, especially in America. We're such a huge country and a huge nation. I mean, my wife is from Turkey and they walk everywhere because everything is very close and accessible. So perhaps it may be a different argument or conversation there. But here in America, you can't get anywhere without a driver's license or a car, perhaps in many cases, most of the time. So that's just one of many other issues that we can perhaps identify and highlight in the system. So first of all, yes, as Muslims, we are held to the same laws and systems that every other citizen, every other American, or any other person anywhere in the world, where whatever the laws constitute in the laws of the land, we are required to uphold the laws of the land. However, as law-abiding citizens, we are also responsible to speak for justice and be firm in our stance to uphold justice and fairness. And we need to love for our brother what we love for ourselves, as all of our traditions, I believe, all preach that same message. And so now, how am I going to love for my brother what I love for myself, and be, firm in holding and establishing justice for everyone, while there are laws and systems that prevent me from doing so. So there's one example I'll share, and I'll end on that, and perhaps a quote from one of my heroes, Malcolm X, and I'll finish with that. The first of which is uh, when a person is facing this dilemma of determining what their faith is saying versus what the laws are saying, they have two options, actually. They themselves may need to leave that land that doesn't uphold those values that their faith tradition enforces upon them to uphold, or to stand for justice, like when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself, in the Meccan period prior to Islam even, there was an alliance of the virtuous that he was called to, where the wealthy and the powerful in the society were wronging or cheating those who are weak or poor from lesser families or tribes. And he said, if I was called to the same allegiance today, I would definitely answer to stand for what's right, even if the society or the laws of the land or the customs or the culture of that time. So to speak for justice, if you have the power to change a wrongdoer, he said that you should physically stand and change it. If you don't have that power, you should verbally voice that. If you can't do any of those things, you should have that discomfort in your heart, and you should pray for those people. So on all those levels at the same time, perhaps, or depending on our situation, we all have an obligation to say or do something about it. Malcolm X says, it takes all of the religious, political, economic, psychological, and racial ingredients or characteristics to make the human family and human society complete and whole. So I've gone beyond my time limit here. I think I'll save my personal stories of how my wife came to the US in 2 years, even though I'm an American citizen, and we followed all of our normal laws and systems that are in place. But again, I'll save that for another time. And I can't say I understand fully, but I have some sense of some of the situations and hardships that those people living in America who are not yet citizens or illegal immigrants.
Thank you so much. I feel like, after sharing a lot of really important stuff, including the Malcolm X quote, we circle back to this theme of recognizing that we are them, right? Which is where your personal story about your wife comes in, that you experienced a 2-year delay. And I'm sure that was very hard on you and on her. And so you just realize again and again and again that it's not just empathy through imagination, it's empathy through experience, right? And that if we just remind ourselves that we've been there, that we can more easily get to the place of what our religion teaches us, what our God teaches us, which is that this is not right, that something needs to change. And I do want to just uplift our Director of Social Services, Lucy Rabah, had written in the chat that the value of meeting people where they are, getting back again to the chain link fence and the sidewalk pantry. These are social work values for the social workers listening. And of course, she's absolutely right. And I think it's a great place where we see the secular and the faith kind of intertwine. So with that, this has been a really fabulous discussion. I personally could listen to you guys all day. It's really very inspiring and wonderful. But I want to turn the floor over to our partners at Interfaith Philadelphia and have them introduce themselves, and just talk a little bit about their work, which is ongoing in this space. So yes, I think if you want to unmute yourselves.
Hi,
Andrew.
how's it going? So I'm Andrew Feigenbaum. I'm the communications director with Interfaith Philadelphia. Interfaith Philadelphia for the past 18 years has been challenging Philadelphians and the greater region to welcome the stranger and to also dare to understand one another. So we do that through a number of different ways. We have programs and resources for people from age 5 to 105 that we hope will help people connect across lines of difference in their schools, homes, faith communities, workplaces, and beyond. We have programs from workplace DEI trainings to movie night discussions to summer camps for middle schoolers, college spring break experiences, and of course, dialogue facilitation workshops. So we're just really honored to be here. And we love that we can spread interfaith understanding with our amazing partner, ISPA. We thank all the panelists for being here, and we hope that you'll check out some of the things that we have to offer. We do a lot of conversations just like the one you're watching right now. And you can see more of what we do at interfaithphiladelphia.org. So thank you everyone again. And I'll turn it back to you for the rest of the program.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And so this last half should move rather quickly. And as I indicated, this is going to be the advocacy part. So before we choose our breakout rooms based on the issues, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about what advocacy is. We throw that term around, and what we're asking you to engage in. So there's really two aspects to advocacy. One is education, right? Because if you don't know what the issues are, what the problems are, not only in general, but even on a personal level, we've heard a lot of stories from our speakers about how our immigration system has impacted them. But if you don't know those details, it's hard for you to know how you can be helpful, right? So a big part of what we do is try to provide education. And we do that through discussions like the one we've had today. And we really hope that you will pass on what you've learned. And that can be anything from bringing it up with your kids or at the dinner table to getting your friends and colleagues to go look at the recordings on our website. Because the more that people are educated about how our immigration system works, the more likely people will be upset and appalled. A lot of why our immigration exists the way that it does is because the public doesn't realize how harmful it is. And when people do learn that, they rise up, and it's fairly bipartisan in the rising up. So education is a big piece. And then the second piece is really exercising your rights in the democracy that we have. So how do we do that? There are a variety of bills that are pending right now or that exist and need improvement. And the real way to express either support or consternation is through the legislators. And I know that certainly over the Trump years, many of you on this call were probably heavily engaged in calling your legislators. You may still be calling your legislators, and that's wonderful. And I also know that it can feel like screaming into the void, right? You write a carefully crafted letter, or you leave a voicemail message, or you leave several, and you get back a canned response from your legislator that doesn't really address anything that you raised, and makes you wonder whether any of it is worth it. So I'm here to tell you it is worth it. And I'm going to share my favorite story, which illustrates why and how it's worth it. So first, the thing that you need to know is that all legislators, both federal and state, have staff that count the number of calls that they receive on every issue every single day, calls and letters. And they take their marching orders from those calls and letters. So if on a given week, the vast majority of calls have been about healthcare, then they know, okay, well, darn, I'm going to have to work on this because my constituents really have some kind of bee in their bonnet about healthcare. And it really, really matters. The reason I know this, I've met with many legislators myself, and they tell me, well, before this meeting, I checked with my staff and I only got 2 calls about immigration. So it doesn't really seem like an issue that our constituents care about. So number one, it matters, and that's how it matters. But number two, my favorite story, in July or June, I should say, rather, June of 2017, you may recall that we had a Republican president and an all Republican Congress who were determined to get rid of the ACA, what's commonly known as Obamacare. They felt that this was an outrageous example of government overreach. And they also thought that their constituents were on their side. And so they pledged to each other that they would rescind Obamacare before the July 4th recess. Health advocates across the country mobilized and got out really critical pieces of information about Obamacare, who would be impacted by the rescission, and what to do about it. And so many people called in the week before the July 4th recess that the faxes were tied up, emails were bombarded, and the legislators ultimately, remember again, all Republican Congress and a Republican president. So they had all the power, but they were told in no uncertain terms by their constituents, don't use that power to take our health care away. And so they left for July 4th, having not rescinded the act. And they never touched it again because they got the message loud and clear. And they got that message because people called all day long and they wrote letters and they sent emails and they were relentless. So that's my favorite example of why we do what we do. So we're going to go into breakout rooms based on issues, and we're going to ask each of you to either write a letter, write an email, or put on your calendar the date that you're going to call and give a script to a legislator about a specific issue. And we're going to ask you to do that repeatedly, today being the first time. So the 3 breakout rooms that we have that you can choose, there will be a breakout room about humanitarian parole, which is a specific immigration remedy that has been around for a long time, but is currently has come up again because of the need to help the separated families from Afghanistan. Many of the people that were evacuated got separated from their family in the chaos of the evacuation. And now their family's been left behind in Afghanistan, and the United States government so far has said nothing about how they're going to get those people out. And in fact, those people, because they're related to the people that we evacuated, many of whom served as interpreters for our military, are being threatened, are being tortured, are being assaulted. So humanitarian parole is an important remedy, and we're going to talk about that in one of the breakout rooms. The other breakout room we're going to talk about is pathways to citizenship. There are several pieces of legislation pending. And so we're going to talk about what that legislation is, why it's important, and then write our letters together. And the third one, as I already mentioned, is going to be about driver's licenses, and it'll be a state breakout room. So, and there you'll learn about the in-person action that's going to be happening in Harrisburg in a few weeks. Do the staffers know who's calling? And so they do, in the sense that if whoever calls is not a constituent, they won't take it seriously. But if it is a constituent and the constituent calls repeatedly, they'll start to get nervous because they'll be like, wow, this constituent is going to go mobilize all the other constituents because they're really angry. So it's okay if you call repeatedly as long as you're a constituent.